You thought division was bad back in 4th grade when you had to do long division with numbers. But then algebra came along, and now we know we can do division with variables. I know, warms our hearts, right? We're going to start with synthetic division. Synthetic division cannot be used all the time, and if you want to look at the other version, it's in my video called long division. But for synthetic division, we can use it if the term on the bottom is linear, meaning there's an x to the first and nothing bigger as far as the power, and if the coefficient in front of that x is just 1. So the denominator is where you look to determine if you can use synthetic division or not. If it's just a coefficient of 1 and an exponent of 1 with the x, then you can do it. If there's any other coefficient or if there is any other exponent other than 1, cannot use synthetic division. But here's how to do it, because on this one we can. Our next step, now that we know we can use it, is to figure out what will make the denominator equal 0. Subtract 3 from both sides and we get that x equals -3. So we put -3 over here and we put a little box around it. It just kind of helps us know it's separate from the rest of the stuff. So we got the number that would make the denominator 0, and we put that in this little box. Now we need to look at the coefficients for the numerator. In other words, we have 1x squared, -3x, plus 7. So I'm going to write those coefficients down here. 1, -3, and 7. Once I have that done, notice I left some space below the numbers and then drew this line. But the space is there on purpose. We'll need it. First thing is I take this number and just move it straight down, which is 1. Then I multiply the number in the box by this number down here. So -3 times 1 is -3. Then I add these two numbers together. -3 plus -3 is -6. So just to make sure you see what I did, first thing I just bring whatever number's in front, which in this case is the 1, I just brought it straight down. Then I multiplied the 1 by the -3 in the box and placed it right here. Then I added those two numbers together. -3 plus -3 is -6. Now I multiply the -3 by the -6. Gives me a positive 18. And I add 7 plus 18 and get 25. So the way we then interpret this into our answer is by putting the x's with it. Now if you look, we started with x squared, x to the first, and then there's no x here. You could say x to the 0 if you want, but I wouldn't worry about it. In other words, you have an x squared, an x, and then just a constant. But we've just divided it, so that brings all of it down. So instead of starting with x squared, we now start with x to the first, and then -6 is our constant, and 25 is our remainder. So how we need to write this answer is x minus 6, I'm pulling that from right here, plus my remainder, which is 25 over x plus 3. So you always put your remainder over the original denominator. So the remainder, if you have one, if you have a 0, don't worry about it. But if you have a remainder, you need to put it over top of your original denominator. Which, if it helps you think about why, if you remember way back in the day when we did things like 7 divided by 2, we could say, okay, 2 would go into 7 3 times. 3 times 2 is 6. Subtract the 6, we get 1. So 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. As you can see, we actually just took the remainder and put it over top of the original denominator, which was 2. So we're doing the same process here. We take our remainder and we put it over top of the original denominator. Next up, 3x squared minus 5 over x minus 2. This one we also can use synthetic division because there's a coefficient of just 1 on the bottom in front of the x and an exponent of 1. So we are allowed to use synthetic division. So I need to figure out what will make the denominator equal 0. That would be positive 2. So 2 goes in my box over here, and then I take the coefficients. But here's what you have to watch out for. You notice this has 3x squared, but then it has no x. So we don't write it because it's 0. Or we don't write it up here, I mean, because it's just 0x. But we do have to put a 0 here because we can't skip terms here. We can't skip powers of x is what I should say, because we have 3x to the second power, we have 0x to the first power, and then our constant is negative 5. So please watch out for when they have a term that's not there, like x to the first. Make sure you put a 0 in there to represent that missing piece. Now, just like before, I bring the very first number down. Then I multiply 2 times that 3 and get 6. Then I add those two numbers together, 0 plus 6. Then I multiply 2 times 6, which is 12. And I add negative 5 plus 12, which is 7. So just like before, I make sure I note that I started with a squared, but then I divided by an x, so now I'm down to x to the first. Plus 6 is my constant, plus 7 is my remainder, so I need to put it over top of my original denominator, which is x minus 2. So my final answer is 3x plus 6 plus 7 over x plus 2. Okay, one more example with synthetic division. X cubed minus 4x squared plus 3x minus 1, all divided by x minus 2. Again, we check. We are allowed to use synthetic division because we just have a coefficient of 1 and an exponent of 1. We look at what will make the denominator equal 0, and that would be 2. So I'm going to put 2 in this box. Then I look at the coefficients on top. Make sure, if it's nothing written, you know it's a 1. So I do a 1 for the x cubed, a negative 4 for the x squared, positive 3 for the x, negative 1 for the constant. So none are missing this time. It just goes down, like you would think, from 3 to 2 to 1 to then no x at all. First step, I bring the 1, the first number, straight down. Then I do 2 times 1 is 2. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Then I add the negative 1 and the negative 2 together and get negative 3. So you might notice we have more terms this time than we did the first two examples. First two examples we just had 3 numbers that we ended up with. This time we have 4. That's because this time we started with a cubed. So our first term, because we're dividing it, so it goes down one level, because x cubed got divided by this x. So we start with an x squared, and then an x, and then negative 1 is our constant. Negative 3 is our remainder, which we'll have to put over x minus 2. So our final answer should be x squared minus 2x minus 1 minus 3 over x minus 2. X squared minus 2x minus 1 minus 3 over x minus 2. And I know one question I get a lot is, well, can I just always put plus and then just put the negative on top? You certainly can. I think it's better to just bring it out as a minus, but it's certainly not incorrect to do it that way. So that's synthetic. If you want to see the other one, you'll look at long division.